because a lot of this, I'm going to challenge you to do some things in the new year. Some of you heard me saying earlier, I am not sitting here drinking my handy dandy friendly Diet Dr. Pepper that I was so accustomed to. I am drinking my caffeinated water. And they do, yes, they do make Crystal Light makes you can put it in there, a caffeinated water. There's several different types of caffeinated water. But what a great time to start a new habit, the first of the year. It is the beginning of a new year, and there's things that we can now choose. Okay, I'm going to do something in a different way. And maybe you've already started to do something in a different way. We're all still here. We've been resilient. If we are taking care of somebody with dementia, we most definitely are resilient. But did you know that it only takes 30 days to make or break a habit? 30 days and we can make or break a habit. And so we can commit to 30 days. It really isn't that long. That's why when people have a drug or an alcohol problem, they go to rehab for 28 to 30 days. Because if you can set your mind to do something or to not do something for 28 to 30 days, it becomes a habit. So we're going to talk about, because at the end of this, I'm going to give you some exercises to do that have been proven with research to help us build our resiliency. Can you do it for 30 days? Because if you can commit to something for 30 days, it becomes a habit. So here's our objectives for today. We're going to first talk about those feelings and emotions involved in caring for someone else, specifically taking care of somebody who has dementia, and how it is different on a caregiver than it is taking care of somebody who may have another type of illness. We're going to go through some support tips to help us decrease stress and increase our resiliency, some exercises to help us develop resiliency, warning signs of caregiver stress, and then define resilient personal resilience. There's my information for those of you that are going to be needing your CEUs. And then I thought we'd start by looking at this. Welcome to another one of life's brick walls standing squarely in your path. Please select from the following options. And look at our options there. Are we going to go over it? Are we going to go under it? Are we going to go around it? Are we going to go through it? You got to make a choice. And I was thinking as I was updating this program yesterday, I think in the last, let's see, starting in March of 2020, we've gone under several things, around, through. We've made different choices. We've had to be resilient about a lot of different things in the last almost 2 years now. There's different ways we make choices. And so we're going to talk about some of those different things that we do about being resilient. We all have these different disruptions in our expectations about how we thought our relationships would even turn out. What we thought would happen and then what actually happened usually is completely different. And then throw dementia into the mix. And dementia is typically a complete and total shock. We were not expecting this. This came from out of nowhere. Because how many of us ever thought that we would be helping our loved one in the bathroom? That we would be helping our loved one get dressed? Whether it's a parent, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a friend. This wasn't where we thought we would be. How many of us ever thought that we would be answering to a different name? That our own parent might be calling us mama, and that we would answer to that? How many of us ever thought that we would develop a skill set that we never ever wanted? But here we are. We're resilient and we've done it. And again, think about these last 22 months. If you would have told any of us 22 months ago what we would have just gone through and what we would have done, most of us would have gone, that will never happen, but it has happened. And look at what you've done and what you've been able to do because you're resilient. But if you would have known it was coming, would you have thought you'd have been able to do it? So look at those definitions there that are on the screen of what is resilience. Toughness, I like that one, toughness. The ability to recover quickly from difficulties. The ability to adjust easily to adversity or change. I think that one really fits a dementia caregiver. Boy, do we get where we can adjust. It also makes me think of those therapeutic stories that we get to that we can just tell off the top of our head. We can come up with these stories. And the ability to return to the original shape and size after being compressed. That's why I found that little graphic there. So I thought, don't we feel like that so many times, especially at the end of the day? As caregivers of those with dementia, we learn to adjust to a very undesirable reality. But to do that, we have to master the art of drawing from our mental, our emotional, our physical, and all of our spiritual energy that we've got. But we can start to run very low. And we can even start to run out of our energy, and then we face a crisis ourselves. The good news is, though, research has shown that we can develop resilience. We've seen it happen over and over again. We did this program for the first time last year. That's why I went through and I updated it this past week, because here we are another year in. Resilience, bouncing back from difficulties with families, relationships, health, work, home, finances, you name it, bouncing back. Now, if you're a professional healthcare worker, so many times we're performing in an environment that is filled with unexpected events where we've got multiple residents, multiple clients, multiple patients on top of our own personal things that we have going on. So this is not just for people that are just taking care of, your own loved one with dementia, but also for professional caregivers. We know that dementia affects the entire family. Care partners are actually known as the hidden patient. We know that. We're going to look at the statistics. Those of you who have been on programs with us know that we always talk about the families and how the families are affected. But what is it that is so different about taking care of somebody with dementia rather than taking care of somebody that has some other type of disease? Well, as dementia progresses, they are going to depend on us more and more and more. It's not a typical disease model. And one of the reasons that we are more vulnerable to burnout and fatigue, and it's called compassion fatigue, not just fatigue because I'm tired, but it's compassion fatigue, is because of the long process of decline. It can be anywhere from 3 to 20 years. Now that 20 years, that is not very often, but it does happen. A person who's diagnosed before the age of 65, their average life expectancy is about 5 years, 5 to 7 years. And a person who's diagnosed after the age of 65, their average life expectancy, 10 years. Those are just averages. I've known someone who lived 23 years after they were diagnosed, but I've also known someone who lived about 18 months after they were diagnosed. So these are just averages. But that is why we have the burnout and the compassion fatigue, is because of this long, drawn out process. So care partners go through this grief that we're doing the program about next week. And there's two names for that grief that we go through. It's ambiguous grief and anticipatory grief. Because what we're feeling is not unlike a death, except the person's still alive. So the name for that is ambiguous grief. It's when we're grieving the loss of the living, because we are losing them a little bit at a time. So that takes a lot of resilience to be able to take care of someone that you're losing parts of while they're still living. So ambiguous grief is losing the loss of the living. And again, we're doing a whole program on both of these next week. If you're interested, you'll get information on this when you get these slides later today. The other one's called anticipatory grief. And anticipatory grief is when we're grieving the future. Anticipatory grief is when we're getting caught up in that what if, or what's going to happen. Now, as a nation, we're kind of doing some anticipatory grief right now because we're doing a lot of what ifs. Where are we headed? Oh no, are we shutting down again? What's going on? So anticipatory grief is any time that we're grieving the future. But with dementia care, as caregivers, we do ambiguous grief and anticipatory grief. So that affects our resilience. So here are the statistics that we talk about. The care partner spouses between the ages of 66 and 96 who are experiencing mental and emotional strain, which would be all caregiver spouses, have a 68% higher risk of dying than people the same age who are not caregivers. So the spouse who is the caregiver passing away before the patient because of the stress of being a care partner. And then this statistic that came out last year about adult children, they finally started tracking adult children. Sharecare.com, adult children, a 63% higher risk of dying over the course of caregiving for 4 or more years. This is sandwich generation. I'm taking care of my parents, but maybe I have those boomerang kids that have come back, or maybe I still have kids at home, or I'm raising grandkids, I'm still working, I'm married. And 63% of the time, the adult child dies before their parent when they're taking care of somebody who has dementia. Those numbers are staggering. We know they're true. Jamie and I have watched it happen over and over and over again. And I am forever saying, I've been to way too many funerals of caregivers. And why is that? Well, here are some statistics. These are out of UCLA. Some of the things that we do as care partners to cope. 41% of care partners that are women have turned to alcohol. 54% of men have turned to alcohol. Now, this is not taking into, this is not talking about COVID, because I've got another program that I do about isolation and COVID and the pandemic and the numbers of these very same things and what has happened because of the pandemic. Alcohol sales are way up, prescription medications way up. This is just from being a caregiver. 51% of care partners admit to overusing their prescription medications. And typically the prescription medications we're talking about are anti-anxiety medications. And then 16% of caregivers say that they start to smoke again. But this is the biggest one. 72% of caregivers are overweight. Makes sense. That's the easiest one because we can just eat and it fills something and it's easy and it brings some pleasure. But then there's consequences to that. I found this yesterday as well, and I had to put it up there. I love Charlie Brown. I collect peanut stuff, and you know, Charlie Brown's kind of always depressed. So I had to put this up here before we started looking at some of the signs of burnout. And Charlie Brown saying, "This is my depressed stance." When you're depressed, it makes a lot of difference how you stand. The worst thing you can do is straighten up and hold your head high, because then you'll start to feel better. If you're going to get any joy out of being depressed, you have to stand like this. I love it. Look, you won't be able to sit here. Snoopy right here. I've got him sitting on my desk. That's some of the things that I do, and we'll talk about later about things that you can do. One of mine is keep yourself surrounded with things that bring you joy, even if it's a little Snoopy sitting on your desk. All right, let's look at some of those signs. And we're going to break this down into 4 different categories: emotional, mental, we're going to put together physical, and then social, and we're going to look at spiritual as well. And we're going to call it care partner burnout and compassion fatigue, and then move into how to then build that resilience if you're feeling a little bit drained here at the beginning of this new year. And I hope that you will seriously look at this list. And again, you're going to get these slides, and I hope that you'll run them off, look at them, take a highlighter, take a pen, and check off which of these you're experiencing. Be honest with yourself. These are signs of burnout and fatigue. Notice that I've got anger as number 1 on emotional and mental. Anger, for most people, not everybody, but for most people, is the easiest go-to emotion. When we get angry and we get loud, or we become passive aggressive, we get in control, and we can shut other people up, or we can take control of the situation, whether we realize we're doing it or not. That's why we've got a lot of anger management classes. The root of anger, 9 times out of 10, is fear. That's why we've had an awful lot of anger the last couple of years, because people are afraid. And if you're finding yourself having more and more anger, that's where you really have to stop and go, let's get down to the root of this, what's going on. If you look over there on physical, the one that stands out and so many people don't connect to caregiving is the gastrointestinal problems. Gastrointestinal problems like IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. When you are under a tremendous amount of stress and you are dumping cortisol, when you dump cortisol, your brain dumps cortisol because you're under so much stress, it stops your digestive system, which then leads to constipation, which then may lead to diarrhea. And you may not even be connecting that you're having irritable bowel syndrome because of caregiving. And they go hand in hand. So please take a look at those, go through and see how many of these am I having. Let's look at the next list. This is the social and the spiritual. Social signs, if you're catching yourself starting to withdraw, and you'll see this one on more than one of the lists, if you're starting to pull back from your group, because you're going to see this on the spiritual list as well. I don't need any help. I can just do this by myself. Just leave me alone. Not being able to focus, not having any energy. There's that irritability is going to show up again. You'll see depression and anxiety show up on several of these lists as well. Now, depression, typically, whenever we're doing definitions of depression and anxiety, Depression, we tend to say, is whenever we are thinking more of the past, of the woulda, coulda, shouldas. If I only would have, could have, should have. And anxiety is more of the what ifs, looking toward the future. Depression's past, anxiety's future. And then let's look at the spiritual burnout and compassion fatigue. There's depression again, but this is where we get into that feeling hopeless, having a spiritual disconnection. I feel like God has abandoned me, or that God is very, very far away from me. I've lost my connection, or even starting to have doubts of how can I believe in a God that would allow such a terrible thing to happen? That's spiritual burnout and compassion fatigue. So those all go then into this little chart right here. And again, you're going to get copies of all of this. So then they're all right here together, the mental, physical, social, and spiritual. So then we're going to put them together and go, so how do we build resilience in all 4 of these areas? Because if we've got resilience, we're going to have balance. And under each of these, you can see what each of these areas is going to help us with if we can just get balanced in these. And it takes some work. But you remember what I said about that habit, 30 days. 30 days. Can I do this for 30 days? Well, we're 5 days in, and I have not had a Diet Dr. Pepper. I've had my water 5 days in, and it sure feels good every day. I'm marking it off the calendar. 5 days, 5 days in. All right, let's start with mental resilience. Mental resilience starts with positivity, finding hope in the darkest times, foundation of resilience, having that positive outlook. And sometimes it is just trying very hard to be that positive energy and using the stressors to create the resilience. I promise you, the majority of the time, I don't feel like having this smile on. I don't, but I work in memory care, and my residents deserve to see it, because behind a mask, you can still see that I'm smiling. And before I go into any of the houses where our residents live, we have little key fobs. And before I hit that door, I take a breath and I put it on. Mental resilience. Before I teach a class, before I go in with students, before I get on the phone with family members that I'm then taking care of, I'm going to do the same thing. Let's go down to that next one on confidence. Knowing your strengths and believing that you can use challenges as an opportunity to learn, grow, and develop. Instead of doing something like beating ourselves up over I can't or I'm not the best at, you do things like this when you're coming on workshops, you're getting in a support group, you're reading books, you're finding ways that you can. I said earlier, this is a skill set. Taking care of somebody who has dementia is a skill set that most of us didn't have because we didn't work in this field. And even if you worked in the field, taking care of somebody that is your personal family member is very different from taking care of other people. Structure is allowing us to prioritize. Imagination. This is one I kind of want to land on for a minute. We talk about this in a support group an awful lot. Coming up with new, unusual, and different ways to address our issues improves our chances of having positive outcomes. Taking risk is part of being resilient. We have to take risk when we become a care partner of somebody who has dementia. We end up doing things we never, ever would have thought that we would have done. And boy, do we get together on support group and we share those stories, and sometimes we're laughing through tears. But it builds resilience. A couple of the stories that come to mind is a care partner who was taking care of her mother-in-law and says, I never in my life thought I'd end up in the shower with her. But I did. I ended up in the shower with my mother-in-law because I did. Because that's how I could get her to take a shower. And looking back on it, because that mother-in-law has passed now, she said, I wouldn't have missed it. I wouldn't have missed it. Or the wife who talks about the things that she's had to do to help her husband in the bathroom. And it may be that we sing, and we're singing while we're doing all of the things that we've got to do in the bathroom. We're taking risks. We're taking chances. We're doing things that we would have never thought that we'd do. And that goes into that next one, embracing the awful. What choice do we have? We're powering through these challenging parts of being a care partner. This is where we shine. Because think about that last sentence I put here. It's one thing to be good when the conditions are favorable, but it's another thing to be good when the conditions are challenging. And to be able to say, I got my mother-in-law to take a shower because I got in there with her. Whoo, you want to talk about shining. I am shining now. Took a shower with my mother-in-law. It's all good. Never thought I'd do it, but we did it. And I'm more resilient for it. Let's look at physical resilience. This one of all of them is probably the one that we know what to do here. We know what to do to be physically resilient, but are we doing it? This is the one that I think we probably could start with. Like my easy one, I'm putting down the Diet Dr. Peppers, I'm picking up the water. That was my one I can commit to for 30 days. I can commit to that. I'm going to do it. If you think of physical resilience as your health bank account, that's where I had to go with it. My health bank account. We're making the deposits every time we do something that's healthy for our physical body. And you start thinking of what are some small things you can do? What's one thing I can do? And I always think of it in the 28 to 30 days. What can I commit to for 28 to 30 days? Mine at the first of the year was, I'm not going to say, okay, for 28 to 30 days, there's no way I'm going to start with, I'm only going to eat 1,000 calories a day and I'm going to run 10 miles and I'm going to do what, because I know I'm going to fail at that. But I can do, I said I'm going to do 70 ounces of water a day, but I'm doing way more than that because I got this great big 44 ounce thing that I'm filling several times a day. So start with something small. That second bullet point, I put some things in red. When we do any type of exercise and we oxygenate our body, when we get oxygenated blood up to our brain, that's one of the best things we can do for our brain. And we all want to have healthy brain aging, get that oxygenated blood up to our brain. And then we got to think about this also. We're taking care of somebody with dementia. This isn't a sprint. This is a marathon. But we didn't train for a marathon. We're not running a sprint. So we've got to develop our endurance. So we've got to find support. Let's look at social resilience. So many times as caregivers, we don't ask for help. What is something we've learned in the last 2 years? We don't do well when we're alone. We're created to be social. I don't know if you know this or not, but do you realize that the very first negative comment in the Bible is in Genesis 2, and it says, it is not good that man should be alone? The very first negative thought, the very first negative comment is about, it's not good for us to be alone. We're meant for connection. We have to have a team if we're going to do this and not become one of those statistics. So if we start thinking of who can be on my team, and it's not just our family, we need those neighbors, we need those friends, we need those church members, we need our community resources, we need our support group friends, we need our professional caregivers, we need our doctors, our pharmacists. There's a group of people that's out there. that can help. You've got to accept the help. And surrounding yourself with those positive people that help you bounce back so that you can remain resilient. And sometimes we end up cutting ties. This is also whenever we are going to delegate and allow people to help. Don't say, I don't want to burden my kids with that. They've got a life of their own. Because do you know how many adult children that I've had say to me, my mom won't let me help, but that's my dad. And I feel like I'm losing time with him too. I want to spend time with him. Now, think about this also. We don't want to ask our son-in-law to come over and watch our mom and stay right there with her while we go run errands if he's not comfortable doing that. Maybe he's not comfortable doing that, but could he mow the grass? Let him come over and mow the grass. That's where we've got to think, okay, who's on my team and what can they do? Maybe he's not the person to come and sit with her, but maybe he can take the dog to the vet, or maybe someone can go and pick up dinner for us once every couple of weeks. Those people are part of your team. Let them help. And then let's look at spiritual resilience. That's finding meaning. That's continuing to help others, even while you're being a caregiver. So back in March of 2020, when all of this shutdown first started, we moved our support groups to online. And one of our members started doing something that I would just want to share real quick because she got so much joy out of it. I think she's still doing it, as a matter of fact. While taking care of her husband, she got out her old church directory and she started calling people. She started in the A's and started working her way down. Every day, she started calling people in the church directory and just checking in with them. And sometimes she would get people who hadn't talked to anybody in days and days. And she ended up with some folks that they made it a routine that every day at 8 o'clock or every day at 7 o'clock, I'm going to call and just check in with you. She even had some people that she ended up, they needed some stuff. And she was able to do like a door drop off. And it made her feel so good. Now, this is while she was taking care of her husband. Spiritual resilience. Those of you that journal, or even if you don't journal, and again, this is one of those that people will come back and go, I'm so glad I started writing things down. Gratitude. Doing those gratitude lists. And when we start on the exercises, I'll share some things that you can do. And then shifting references over from that trap of why me, because that is a trap. Focusing on solutions and not problems. And watching your language, because we do tend to do this. And I don't want to step on anybody's toes, but I am a licensed counselor, so I do get paid to do that. So we do tend to exaggerate when something is wrong, and we use words when we're talking about ourselves like devastating and disaster, and we use those big words like never and always and the worst. If we'll take a minute and reflect on it, that's why it's so good to write things down. I always, if I'm doing one-on-one counseling with somebody, or even in our support groups, talk about if we try to step outside of the situation and look in on it happening to somebody else. Is it the worst? Is it devastating? Is it a disaster? If you can see it through another person's eyes. And so many people, when they do get to the end of this journey and they look back on it, most people do say they wouldn't have missed it, that it is a blessing, that they are the one that got to take care of their loved one, as hard as it is. So some of the things that we can do to start to strengthen our resilience is we have to warm up to remain resilient, just like we warm up before we do physical exercise. Some of the easiest things that we can do when we're in the moment and we're feeling ourselves getting very, very stressed, because we can do some of these things anywhere. Let's take those deep breaths. We can do that right now. We just take those deep breaths. Like I said before, I walk on any of our houses, sometimes before I pick up the phone, especially if I'm about to pick up the phone with I know my upset family member. Take that deep breath, and I put my smile on because I know it's going to raise my voice. Hey, what's going on? Doing things that bring you joy. Staying connected to your meaning and your purpose. And we'll talk more about that in just a minute. So positive self-talk. If negative self-talk is something that comes natural to you, and for many of us it does, where we are great about putting the boxing gloves on and beating ourselves up, one of the things that we really work on is, what would you say to somebody else? And that's going to be one of the exercises that we look at in just a minute. But I know that all of you have heard this saying, but you may not know where it comes from. That saying, that which does not kill me makes me stronger. You may not know where that came from. It actually is from a German philosopher. And he was somebody who really suffered with a lot of physical and emotional health issues. The point of that is that adversity actually makes us stronger. So could it be that we can actually find gratitude in our circumstances? So what that means is, can we take these challenges, find a sense of control when we're in these rough times, turn it around and use it, reframe it. This is actually an exercise that the Navy SEALs use. They use a reframe and focus exercise where you're able to walk into a situation, you look at the entire situation, you reframe it, you refocus at what's left. In therapy, cognitive behavior therapy, reframe it. So with the time that we have left, we've got about 15 minutes. I want to leave a few minutes for some questions if we have any. So let's look at some exercises on things that we can do that are research shown to be able to build resilience. I got a lot of these from positivepsychology.com. If you have never looked at that site, I encourage you to go to this. It's called positivepsychology.com. This first one's called storytelling activity. Oops, let me go back. So if you'll look at, I've got all of the instructions on here, and again, you're going to get these. If you think about a story of your own story, where you repeat that story over and over, and it brings you a lot of worry or anxiety, one of the things that you can do, this is part of reframing, is if you can write it out and you write a new version with a more positive interpretation. So here's an example. Personal example. I get to care for my mother who has dementia. And most days she's very, very ugly to me, except when we watch Carol Burnett. Then she's mom again. So we're going to watch Carol Burnett every day. So when we have a doctor's appointment, I am going to take an iPad, because we can see an iPad better, and we are going to sit and we're going to watch Carol Burnett on the way to the appointment in the waiting room. We're going to have it on all the time. We also are going to stop at Sonic or Brahms on the way there and on the way back. And this is some of the things that I had to work out and figure out, and by writing things out and writing our story out and not getting caught up in the, it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad, it's going to be bad. And this is one of those, it's a storytelling activity. Rather than making it what it could be, because it has been in the past, what can I do to change the ending? How can I shift it? And I may have to try it more than once. Make it have a positive interpretation. This one's called a purpose reflection activity. And that's not a mistake in the first box. It does say, why are you? So all of these are prompts. So again, I encourage you to journal if you don't. You can also just think through these. But this is to think about things like, why do you get up in the morning? What is it that keeps you awake at night? When are you the most alive? I love the last one. If you met an older version of yourself, what advice would they give you? So there's several things on that page. I want to make sure and get to all of these, so I'm going to move on. Now, here's gratitude. Here's one of the gratitude activities. And you can find all kinds of information on gratitude. You can Google things on gratitude, but this is a really easy one. I've put in red some of the easiest things to do. Every day for the next week, and this would be one you could do for 30 days. If you wanted to try this for 30 days, it could become a habit. Write down 3 to 5 things each day that you're grateful for. And if you want to really try something, I did this last year for a while. I only wrote down one thing a day for many, 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 many days, and you can't repeat them. So then you end up with this very long list of things you're grateful for. Another thing you can do is to tell people you see every day what you appreciate about them. This can really start getting into something like the pay it forward. When you're very, very nice to someone, or you hold the door for someone, or you pay for the person behind you's drink or meal or whatever, who knows what they're going to do later in the day, doing something nice for someone else. Find something funny activity. And when we are in the middle of being at the end of our rope, sometimes the last thing we think we can do is laugh. And it's one of the very best things that we can do for ourselves. Now, this is really interesting. You can trick your brain into producing dopamine. Whenever you smile, and this is another one of my reasons that I do this, because I studied this in school, you can literally fake it till you make it with making your brain produce dopamine. The muscle movements of a smile stimulate your amygdala to release those neurotransmitters, and it encourages a positive state, and it makes you release dopamine. There's an article about this in Experimental Psychology. They did a whole program on this on CNBC. There's interesting stuff about this. You can make yourself release dopamine instead of releasing cortisol. So here are some things that you can do. One of the good things now is we have this thing called YouTube. So I mentioned Carol Burnett earlier. Some of you are probably too young to even know who I'm talking about with Carol Burnett. Many of you know who I'm talking about. And you can go on there and you can pull up, like you can type in Tim Conway, Carol Burnett, and you can pull up their little sketches. And most of their sketches were about 5 minutes. And you can just watch it. And it will make you laugh, or it will make you smile. And you just dump some dopamine and you get that where you feel better. But this exercise is really good. It talks about to seriously think about 3 of the funniest things that you've ever experienced, ever seen, or ever heard. So you've got to think about it. When were 3 times in your life that you have laughed so hard that you had tears rolling down your face. Maybe you were bent over your laughing. We've all had them. Think of some of those times and jot them down where you were just in stitches. If it's something that you can look up, so if it was something that you watched, you can probably find it. But then write about how that made you feel. And then looking at it at the end of the day. That is a great thing to go to bed to. Looking at funny pictures, looking at funny videos. That's where I found those 2 pictures that are on there, because I love looking at funny animal videos or funny animal photos. And then this one's called Finding the Silver Lining Activity. Looking at the bright side. This was actually from a study that was done in 2014. When you think about an upsetting experience that you have recently had, rather than focusing on the experience, which is what we tend to do, is trying to find the positive in it. This is a good thing that we, many times in support group, we try to do this, where we try to, okay, what is something, and I actually added this from something that someone said in the support group one time, that I got to see the sunrise. I got to see a sunrise that I wouldn't have seen had I not been up at that time, because they had been up with their loved one and up with their loved one and up with their loved one. And they finally decided, I'm just going to get some coffee and go outside. So I got to see one of the most beautiful sunrises I've ever seen. Or people will say something like, I met you. I met this group of friends that I would have never met. Silver lining. I developed this skill set, and because of that, I was able to, just naming it, finding a silver lining, finding something good that came from it. Here's that self-compassion activity that I mentioned earlier, where instead of beating ourselves up, we stop for just a minute and go, okay, how would I talk to somebody else? How would I talk to my friend? If my friend came to me with this exact same circumstance, saying the same things that's going on with me, how would I talk to my friend? Would I use the same tone with my friend that I'm using with myself? Would I use the same words with my friend that I am using with myself? And would the actions I am taking toward my friend be the same the actions that I'm taking toward myself? Now, these actions I'm talking about are our self-destructive actions. With me, they tend to be, I'll just eat this whole thing of Pringles. Or no, I probably wouldn't do that if I was sitting in front of my friends. Self-compassion. The next one is a mantra or an identity statement. All of these also I took from our support group. Because we talked about this probably about a year or so ago. And so I actually switched these up and used a lot of these from our support group members. And this is kind of coming up with a statement or a mantra. I have a couple right here on my computer that I can look up and see. Now, you don't want it to just become part of your background. You want it to be something that you actually read. And here are some that people said. I am confident and passionate. I'm consistently excellent every day as a care partner, wife, and mother. I can do anything for a little while. That one's mine. I can do anything for a little while. A hard moment does not mean a hard rest of the day. And then having those things in front of you on your phone, have them where you can see them. I've got another one on my wall right here that says, God will wreck your plans when he sees your plans are about to wreck you. Ooh, that's my one that I'm using right now. I'm choosing grace in this moment. I can ride this out and not let it get me down. Another one is a highlight reel. Highlight reel. This is a good one at night, a good one whenever you're going to sleep. Thinking of 3 things throughout your life that you have done very, very well. And again, as caregivers, we are not very good at being able to call out the things that we do well. Using that identity statement that for yourself, and then thinking through your highlight reel of things that you have done well. Taking some deep breaths, and then running through that highlight reel. So I'm taking some deep breaths. I'm using my mantra statement, and I'm running through. You know what? I got her in that shower. I did do a good job with that. We watched that Carol Burnett show and we laughed together. And then we went to Brahms and we got some ice cream. We had, that part of the day was really good. I'm not talking about the rest of the day or anything that went wrong. I am going to end my day with that highlight reel. And then helping others be resilient. Using that affirmation with other people. They may not even realize the things that they're doing well because they may be at the point that all they're seeing are the things that they're doing wrong. So pointing out and helping them realize the things they're doing well, encouraging people rather than discouraging, bringing support and then being a role model. And in summary, I had to put Tigger on here because he says, life is not about how fast you run or how high you climb, but how well you bounce. Because that's what Tiggers do, is they bounce. There's our information here at the West Center. Let me stop sharing and see if we have any questions. We are right at time. 70% of caregivers being overweight compared to the national average. Oh, that is a great question. Great question. And I do not know what the national average is. This was specific to caregivers. That is a really good question, though. I know that because when I was looking for and researching, because I was looking at, ways that caregivers cope. Thank you. And again, you will get this information. You will get the slides. If you ever have any questions, our support group information is on our website, and we have open groups. So everybody is invited to our support groups. Thank you. Is it available for replay later? We did record it and they're receiving it, aren't they, Jamie?
Yes, you will receive a copy of the slides, a copy of the recording, and the evaluation and how to obtain your CE credits this afternoon. We also download our recorded programs to our YouTube channel. It'll take about maybe 1 to 2 weeks for us to get them uploaded. But we also encourage you to visit our YouTube channel right now to see our previous programs if you're interested in looking through the library of videos we have.
Great. So yeah, you'll get a copy of the recording and then it will go up on our YouTube channel. All right. Thanks, everybody. I think we are right at time. I appreciate you being here. See you later. Bye-bye.